Have you ever watched someone you love be treated like they don't belong and felt completely powerless to stop it? Imagine standing in an airport, your two little girls clutching their boarding passes, excited for their first flight, only to be told they can't board because of the color of their skin. Now imagine you're their father. The world sees you as powerful a CEO, a leader, a man who commands fleets of planes. But in that moment, none of that matters. You face a choice: walk away quietly and protect your image, or stop everything, every flight, every dollar, every expectation, and demand the world listen. What would you do if justice meant grounding everything you built, if silence meant betraying your own children? This isn't just a story about power. It's about courage, love, and the cost of doing what's right when the sky itself seems against you. Stay with us, because this isn't just his story. It could be any of ours. If this moved you even a little, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring real stories that remind the world what humanity still means. The digital board above the terminal flickered in silence, one after another. The words "on time" dissolved into red letters. Canceled, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Gate agents whispered into radios. Travelers looked up, confused, angry, afraid. At the center of it all stood Malcolm Hayes, a tall, calm man in a charcoal suit, eyes steady as a storm about to break. He watched the chaos spread, his reflection caught in the glass wall where planes once taxied freely, when a reporter rushed toward him, shouting, "Mr. Hayes, why did you ground every flight?" He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "Because sometimes silence flies too easily." The scene froze there, like a photograph suspended in midair, and the story rewound to 2 hours earlier. The morning began softly, with sunlight crawling across the kitchen tiles of a quiet suburban home outside Atlanta. The smell of coffee mingled with the crackle of bacon. Clara Hayes, Malcolm's wife, moved with practiced ease, packing a lunchbox, checking a camera battery, smiling through the usual Saturday rush. "Naomi, remember your boarding pass," she called. A voice floated from upstairs, half singing, half mumbling. "Already printed." "Mom, Naomi Hayes, 17, darted down the stairs, camera strap hanging from her neck. She had her father's calm eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. Her younger brother, Caleb, sat at the counter, spoon tapping against a cereal bowl. "You're gonna miss your flight. Photo queen," he teased. Naomi grinned. "At least I'll look good doing it." Malcolm entered, tying his tie, his phone buzzing with messages from the SkyNova Airlines board. He looked tired, but his voice was warm. "Big day." "Huh." Naomi nodded. "New York photo camp. I still can't believe I got in." He poured a cup of coffee, watching her adjust the camera lens. "You know," he said softly, "every picture you take, remember, it's not about what you see. It's about what you choose to keep." Naomi rolled her eyes playfully. "Dad, not another one of your CEO life quotes." He laughed. "All right, one last thing then. Be kind. But if they cross the line, don't stay quiet." Clara looked up from her mug. "Malcolm." He met her eyes. She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what those words meant. The car hummed along Interstate 85, sunlight blinking through the trees. Naomi sat in the back, scrolling through photos on her camera. Caleb leaned toward the window, counting planes in the distance. Their aunt, Renee, drove, chatting about the Dallas weather forecast. "Feels like the whole world's moving faster these days," Renee said. Naomi replied without looking up. "Maybe that's why I like taking pictures. It slows things down, She snapped a photo through the car window-blurred highways. A sign reading DFW Airport, next exit. The shutter clicked softly, like a heartbeat marking the calm, before something heavy. Back in his office at SkyNova headquarters, Malcolm stood before a wall of flight data screens. Rows of routes, numbers, weather alerts, each pixel a heartbeat of the airline he had built from near bankruptcy. A young assistant entered. "Sir, the partnership meeting with AeroSky is at 11. Malcolm nodded. "Tell them I'll be there. On time." He didn't know then that by 11 o'clock, the meeting wouldn't matter. By 11 o'clock, every partnership, every handshake would be tested. DFW buzzed with weekend travelers, families hugged, suitcases rolled, coffee steamed. Naomi and Caleb followed Aunt Renee toward gate B-19. Naomi stopped to capture the reflection of a plane wing in the glass. 2 TSA officers watched her a moment longer than usual. One whispered, "That's an expensive camera for a kid." Naomi smiled politely. Scholarship gift. But her hands tightened around the strap. Caleb noticed. "Ignore them," he said under his breath. "I'm fine," she answered. Yet her voice carried a tremor only he could hear. They reached the security checkpoint. Naomi handed over her ID. The agent studied it longer than necessary, eyes flicking between the card and her face. Then, to another officer, "Can you take a look at this?" Naomi's smile faltered. Caleb shifted closer, instinctively protective. The officer finally returned the ID. "You can go," but the tone cold, dismissive, left a bruise words couldn't hide. At that same moment, Malcolm's phone buzzed with a message from Clara. "They're boarding soon." He smiled, replying with a single thumbs-up emoji, then turned to a stack of reports. Outside, the Atlanta skyline shimmered under the morning haze. He took a sip of coffee, unaware that somewhere over in Dallas, his daughter's journey was about to stop before it even began. The narrator's voice lowers. He believed he had taught his children how to fly, but the world still had lessons in landing. The camera pans upward to the endless Texas sky, where a single plane begins its descent. Fade to black. The morning air at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport shimmered in faint gold. Naomi adjusted the strap of her backpack as the automatic doors sighed open and swallowed her into the moving crowd. The air smelled of coffee and jet fuel, of hellos and goodbyes, all tangled together. Caleb walked beside her, humming the song that had been stuck in his head since breakfast. Aunt Renee kept checking her watch, worrying more about time than anyone else. Naomi looked up at the high glass ceiling. Planes glided past like silver birds. For a second, she forgot the noise, the people, the pressure of making her first trip alone. All she saw was light breaking through the roof and landing on her camera lens. "Smile, Caleb," she said. He groaned. "Do I have to? Come on. First picture of the day." She snapped it anyway, his face mid-eye roll, and laughed to herself. At the check-in counter, Renee placed the tickets on the desk. "Hayes family to New York on AeroSky. Please." The clerk, a young man with a clipped tone, nodded without looking up. He typed, printed boarding passes, and slid them forward. Naomi thanked him, but he didn't reply. He just turned to the next passenger. It was small, barely noticeable, yet Naomi felt it, the chill that slips beneath words. She said nothing. She wanted this day to stay simple. The security line moved slowly. When they reached the front, the first TSA agent, a middle-aged man with square glasses, looked at Naomi's ID and hesitated. "Is this really you?" he asked. Naomi blinked. "Yes, sir." He studied the photo again, his brows pressing together. "You look different here. It was taken 2 years ago." She explained. "I had shorter hair then." He didn't smile. "Step aside. Please." Renee frowned. "Is there a problem?" "Just procedure." "Ma'am," the agent replied. Another officer approached, whispered something Naomi couldn't catch. Their glances were quick, professional, and cold. She heard Caleb mutter, "This is stupid." Her throat felt tight, but she forced a smile. "I'm fine," she said softly. A minute later, the agent handed the ID back. "You can go." His tone carried the weight of suspicion disguised as authority. Naomi took the card, murmured thank you, and walked on, the echo of his words following like a shadow. The conveyor belt swallowed her backpack. Her camera went through the X-ray. Everything looked normal, yet something inside her felt off balance, as if she'd stepped onto moving ground. Renee tried to lighten the mood. "See all done. Let's get to the gate and find some pretzels." Caleb grinned. And Sprite. Naomi smiled too, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. They walked through the concourse, past souvenir shops and the smell of cinnamon rolls. Naomi snapped pictures, blurred faces, a janitor polishing the floor, a child asleep against a suitcase. She didn't know why she kept taking photos. Maybe it was instinct, maybe a way to keep control of the moment. Back in Atlanta, at that same time, Malcolm stood before the board of SkyNova Airlines. A presentation flickered on the wall, quarterly ethics and inclusion report. He spoke clearly, calmly. "Our passengers aren't numbers. They are lives in transit. Every decision we make must honor that." The board members nodded, half listening. The industry liked to talk about equality, but few practiced it. Malcolm had spent years fighting to change that culture without drama, without shouting. He believed steady change lasted longer than outrage. When the meeting ended, he checked his phone. A text from Clara appeared. "Kids cleared security. All good." He smiled, typing back a single heart emoji. Then he tucked the phone away, unaware that within an hour, that tiny assurance would collapse. At gate B-19, Naomi and Caleb sat near the window. The plane to New York waited outside, bright white under the sun. Passengers gathered as the boarding announcement echoed. "Zone 3. You're welcomed aboard," the speaker said. Renee stood, handed over her pass, and smiled at the gate agent, a woman in a navy blazer whose badge read C. Peterson. "They're traveling alone," Renee explained. "I just want to make sure they get on safely." Peterson nodded, glancing at the teens. "Of course. Let me check something." She scanned Naomi's boarding pass, then paused. The machine beeped red. "Oh," she murmured. "One moment." She tried again. Red. Naomi's chest tightened. Peterson frowned and typed on her screen. It says the name doesn't match the reservation." Naomi frowned. "That's my ticket. It's printed right there." Peterson's tone stayed polite but distant. "I'll have to verify this with my supervisor." Renee sighed. "Can we please hurry? The flight leaves in 15 minutes. The supervisor arrived, tall, serious, eyes sharp. He took one look at Naomi's ID and shook his head. "We can't board her." "Excuse me," Renee said. "Her ID doesn't match the facial data. It might be fraudulent." Naomi felt her stomach drop. "That's impossible." "Ma'am," he interrupted, "we have to be cautious. There's been an increase in identity fraud among minors." Caleb stepped forward. "She's my sister." The man raised his hand. "Step back, son." People started watching. Phones lifted. A whisper moved through the crowd. Naomi's voice trembled. "Sir, please, I'm just going to a photo camp. The supervisor didn't respond. He turned to the agent. Flag her record. We'll need additional verification. Renee's tone hardened. You're humiliating a child. He met her eyes. Indifferent. It's policy. Naomi felt heat rise behind her eyes. Every second stretched longer. She heard the boarding door close for the other passengers. The world blurred for a moment. All she could focus on was the sound of the lock clicking shut. Peterson avoided her gaze. You can catch the next flight once this is cleared up. When is the next one? Tomorrow morning. Naomi stood frozen, unable to speak. Caleb whispered, We'll call Mom. Somewhere. A plane roared into the sky, its shadow gliding across the window and over Naomi's reflection. Half girl, half ghost. At that moment in Atlanta, Malcolm was pouring another cup of coffee. His assistant joked about weekend plans. He smiled absently, thinking about sending Naomi a text, something fatherly, something encouraging. He never typed it. The phone rang instead. The caller ID showed Clara's name. He answered, cheerful at first. Hey, love, did they take off yet? A pause, then Clara's voice, low and unsteady. Malcolm. They didn't let Naomi board. He frowned. What do you mean, didn't let her? She said she doesn't look like her ID. He froze. The cup slipped slightly in his hand, coffee spilling onto the papers. Where are they now? He asked. In Dallas. Still at the gate. She's crying. Mal. For a long second, he couldn't breathe. The room felt too bright, too small. The hum of the air conditioner grew loud in his ears. I'll handle it, he said finally. His voice was calm, too calm. He hung up, wiped the spill with his sleeve, and looked out the window. Planes were taking off one after another, their wings flashing in the sun. Every passenger carries a story, he whispered to himself, but some stories never make it to the sky. He set down his cup, picked up his jacket, and walked out. Behind him, the digital screens continued to flash routes and times, none yet knowing that before the day was done, one decision would stop them all. The sunlight over Atlanta had turned sharper, the kind that made glass buildings gleam like mirrors. Inside the SkyNova headquarters, the hum of conversation and clicking keyboards filled the air. Everyone was preparing for the weekend slowdown, unaware that something irreversible was beginning to unfold. Malcolm Hayes stepped into his office, his phone still in his hand, Clara's trembling voice echoing in his mind. He set the phone down gently, as though afraid it might shatter the fragile calm that remained. The screens behind him glowed with real-time flight data. Dozens of small planes crawled across the map like glowing fireflies. His world was supposed to be predictable, structured, disciplined, safe. But now, one voice from 800 miles away had broken that illusion. He looked out the window. The city was moving as if nothing had happened. But inside him, something had shifted, a quiet tremor. He picked up the phone and called his executive assistant, Jordan Lee. Cancel my next meeting. Jordan hesitated. Sir, the AeroSky Partnership Review. Yes. Tell them we'll reschedule. Understood. Anything else? Malcolm's voice grew soft, measured. Book me on the next flight to Dallas. Private. He hung up and sat in silence for a long time. His reflection on the dark screen looked older than he remembered. He thought about Naomi's voice, small but steady even when she was scared. He thought about all the lectures he'd given her about dignity, about speaking up. Now she had lived the very lesson he hoped she'd never need. He closed his eyes and remembered another airport, decades ago. He was 19, standing in line for flight training. The instructor had told him they weren't accepting diversity candidates that semester. He'd smiled then, said thank you, and walked away. But the sting had stayed. That rejection had been the seed that grew into everything he'd built his career, his discipline, his armor. Now that same wound had returned for his daughter. At the DFW terminal, Naomi sat in a corner chair near a vending machine, her camera resting lifelessly in her lap. She stared at her reflection in the dark lens, wondering what part of her didn't look American enough. Caleb sat beside her, arms crossed. Renee was at the counter arguing quietly with the gate supervisor, her voice firm but trembling with anger. "I've shown you everything," Renee said. "Her ID, her ticket, school papers. What more do you need?" The supervisor's answer was dry. "We follow verification protocols. Nothing personal. Nothing personal." Renee snapped. "You humiliated a child in front of strangers?" The man shrugged. "Security has to come first." Naomi looked down at her shoes, trying not to cry. Caleb turned to her. "You didn't do anything wrong." "I know," she whispered, "but it feels like I did." A woman sitting nearby leaned over. "Sweetheart, don't let them make you feel small." Her voice carried quiet sympathy, the kind that comes from having lived through something similar. Naomi nodded, but said nothing. Back in Atlanta, Malcolm's jet waited on the runway. As he walked toward it, Jordan jogged beside him, holding a folder. "Sir, the press might hear about this. Should we prepare a statement?" "Not yet." "Should I alert legal?" "Not yet," he repeated, stepping onto the plane. "First, I need to see my daughter." The door closed, and the engines began to roar. Inside the cabin, Malcolm loosened his tie. His hands trembled slightly. He wasn't sure if it was anger or fear. He stared out the window as the city fell away beneath him, replaced by clouds and open sky. He thought of Clara at home, pacing the kitchen, waiting for updates. She hated flying, hated airports, hated the way people looked at her family when they traveled together, as if they didn't belong in first class, as if their success required explanation. He whispered to himself, "It shouldn't take a crisis for people to see we belong." The flight to Dallas felt longer than usual. Every minute stretched. He kept seeing Naomi's face in his mind, the mixture of confusion and hurt he'd seen once before, when she came home from middle school crying because a teacher had assumed she was cheating during a test. He'd told her then, "People see what they're taught to see." She hadn't understood. He wished she didn't understand now. When the plane landed, he didn't wait for assistance. He walked straight through the private terminal, his steps steady, his expression unreadable. The driver he'd called earlier was waiting with a sign, but Malcolm ignored it and went straight to the exit. Meanwhile, at gate B19, Renee was on the phone with Clara, her voice low but furious. "Clara, this is ridiculous. They won't even let us leave the gate area until someone from TSA reviews the footage. She's a child, not a criminal." Clara's voice cracked through the line. "Malcolm's on his way. Just stay with them. Don't let her be alone." Naomi sat quietly, fingers tracing the edge of her boarding pass. The gate agent, Peterson, looked over occasionally but avoided eye contact. The crowd had thinned. The earlier whispers were replaced by the echo of announcements and rolling luggage. A janitor passed by and smiled at Naomi, the kind of small kindness that meant more than words. "Keep your chin up, miss," he said softly. "Some folks just forget what fairness looks like." Naomi blinked back tears and nodded. She wanted to believe him. Outside, Malcolm's car pulled up to the terminal. He stepped out, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward the sliding doors. His face was calm, but every muscle in his body carried purpose. The automatic doors opened. The cool air hit him like a wave. He scanned the hall, spotted Renee near the vending machines, and walked toward her. She looked up, relief flooding her face. "Malcolm, thank God. They're right over there." He nodded, eyes already finding Naomi. His daughter looked smaller than he remembered, curled in the corner chair, clutching her camera like a lifeline. Caleb stood beside her, shoulders tense, ready to defend her against a world he didn't yet understand. Malcolm approached slowly. "Hey, sweetheart." Naomi looked up, eyes wide, unsure if she should be happy or ashamed. "Dad, I'm sorry." He knelt down so they were eye to eye. "You have nothing to be sorry for." Her voice cracked. "They said I don't look like me." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Then they don't know what they're looking at." Renee turned toward the gate counter. "The manager's still here," she said quietly. Malcolm stood, adjusting his cuffs, and walked toward the counter. The supervisor saw him coming and straightened his tie nervously. He had recognized that face, the CEO who had spoken about equality at the last industry summit. "Mr. Hayes," the supervisor began, his tone suddenly polite. I didn't realize Malcolm's gaze was calm, but unyielding. You didn't need to realize who she was. You only needed to realize she's human. The man stammered. "Sir, we were just following security protocol." Malcolm leaned in slightly. "Protocol isn't an excuse for prejudice." Peterson looked between them, her voice small. "I'm sorry, sir. We didn't mean to." "You did mean to," Malcolm interrupted, still quiet. That's the problem. The area had grown silent. A few passengers had stopped to watch. Someone raised their phone, recording. Malcolm turned back to Naomi. "We're leaving," he said gently. As they walked out, a reporter's voice called from across the concourse. "Mr. Hayes, is it true? Aerosky discriminated against your daughter." He didn't answer. He just kept walking, his daughter's hand in his expression unreadable. Behind him, the reporter shouted again, "Sir, will SkyNova respond?" Malcolm stopped. The terminal seemed to hold its breath. He turned slightly, his voice low but firm. "When a system forgets its people, someone has to remind it who it serves." Then he walked away. Outside, the sky was heavy with late afternoon light. Planes rose one by one into the distance, streaks of silver fading into blue. For the first time in his career, Malcolm felt that the sky itself might need grounding. The drive from the airport to the hotel was quiet. Naomi stared out the window, her camera resting in her lap, while Caleb leaned against the seat, pretending to sleep. The city of Dallas rolled by in flashes of light billboards, cranes, towers gleaming against the late afternoon sun. Malcolm sat in the front, beside Renee, who gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Neither of them spoke. When they reached the hotel, the automatic doors opened with a soft chime. Inside, everything was polished marble and calm music. Yet beneath that calm, attention followed them like a shadow. The receptionist smiled brightly, unaware that the air around this family was thick with unspoken questions. "2 rooms, please," Malcolm said. His voice was steady, as always. The receptionist typed quickly, handed him 2 key cards, and wished them a pleasant stay. In the elevator, Naomi finally broke the silence. "Dad, am I in trouble?" Malcolm turned to her. "Why would you think that? Because you came all the way here? You canceled your meetings." He exhaled, looking at her reflection in the mirror-lined walls. "You're not in trouble, Naomi. You're the reason I'm here." She hesitated. "They said it wasn't personal." "It never starts personal," he replied. "But it always becomes personal for the one who's hurt." When the doors opened, he handed Renee one of the key cards. "Get some rest. I'll talk to them later." Renee nodded, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Be careful. Malcolm." He gave a brief smile. "Always. Inside the suite." Clara's voice came through his phone before he even sat down. "Did you see her? Is she okay?" "She's fine," he said softly. "Scared, angry, but fine. What are you going to do?" He paused. "What I should have done a long time ago." He stood by the window, looking down at the traffic below. Every pair of headlights seemed to move with purpose. Every car a story rushing somewhere. Yet tonight, all those stories would keep running while his world slowed to a deliberate, dangerous stillness. At the airport, the video was already spreading online. A bystander had captured everything: the argument, the tears, the way Naomi's boarding pass was taken from her hand. By evening, it was on social media. Captioned "Teen denied boarding because of her skin color." By the time Malcolm checked the news feed, the clip had reached 500,000 views. His name appeared in a comment thread. "Isn't her dad the SkyNova CEO?" He stared at the screen, unmoving. He'd spent his entire career trying to keep dignity and outrage separate. Tonight, that line vanished. He called Jordan back in Atlanta. Set up a meeting with Aerosky's executive office first thing tomorrow. No press. No lawyers yet. "Understood, sir. Should I prepare a brief?" "No. Just silence the noise. I'll handle the rest." After the call, Malcolm walked to the adjoining room where Naomi sat cross-legged on the bed, flipping through her photos. She was quiet, eyes red from crying earlier. The camera rested beside her like a loyal friend. He sat down at the foot of the bed. "Can I see what you took today?" She hesitated, then handed him the camera. He scrolled through the picture's blurry hallways, reflections on glass. Caleb's half-smile, a plane wing caught in the morning light. Then he stopped at a picture of her own reflection on the airport window. Her face was hidden behind the glare of the sun, a shadow with wings stretching across it. "It's beautiful," he said. Naomi frowned. "It's just me. That's why it's beautiful." She didn't answer. The silence grew heavy. Then she asked, almost in a whisper, "Do you ever get tired of proving yourself?" He looked at her, surprised by the question. "Every day," he said. "But the trick is to prove yourself to the right people. Sometimes that person is just you." Outside, thunder rolled faintly. A storm was moving in from the west, the kind that starts soft and ends loud. The next morning, the rain hadn't stopped. The sky hung low and gray, swallowing the airport's skyline. Malcolm arrived at Aerosky's headquarters, a tall glass building that reflected nothing but clouds. Inside, the receptionist recognized him instantly. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes. Ms. Briggs is expecting you." He nodded. "Thank you." Ellen Briggs, CEO of Sky Airlines, was waiting in her office with a cup of tea. Her hair was perfectly arranged, her posture flawless. She rose to shake his hand, her smile sharp as polished steel. "Malcolm, it's been too long." "Not long enough," he replied calmly. She gestured toward a chair. "Please, I saw the video. It's unfortunate." "Unfortunate," he repeated, his tone quiet but cutting. "You know how these things work. One employee oversteps, and suddenly the whole company's on trial." He met her gaze. Then maybe the company should ask why its people feel entitled to overstep. Ellen leaned back, crossing her legs. Are we really going to turn this into a spectacle? We both know public outrage burns fast and dies faster. I'll have our PR team issue an apology. Don't. She blinked. Don't. I don't want your PR. I want accountability. For a moment. She looked at him as if he were speaking a different language. You're angry. I get that. But grounding this entire issue in emotion won't help either of us. He rose slowly. Emotion didn't ground my daughter at that airport. Policy did. Policy and prejudice. Ellen's voice softened slightly. Rehearsed compassion. You have to understand. Malcolm, security protocols are there for everyone's safety. Safety shouldn't look different on darker skin. The silence that followed was heavy, stretching across the glass office like a storm cloud waiting to burst. He took a step closer to her desk. You can fix this quietly, Ellen. Or you can wait until the world decides what kind of airline you run. Her smile faltered. Are you threatening me? No. I'm warning you. There's a difference. He left the office without another word. Outside, rain lashed the windows, and thunder cracked across the sky. The elevator ride down felt endless, every floor indicator glowing like a countdown. When he reached the lobby, Jordan was already waiting with a tablet. Sir, the clip hit 1 million views. Reporters are calling. Do we respond? Malcolm adjusted his jacket. Not yet. Let them talk. Sometimes silence says more than noise. As he stepped out into the rain, his phone buzzed. A text from Clara. Naomi's trying to go back to school tomorrow. She says she wants normal again. He typed back, there's no going back to normal, only forward. He stood there for a moment, rain soaking his shoulders, cars hissing past on wet streets. The world kept moving, indifferent. He looked up at the gray sky. For years, he had believed change came one policy at a time, one conversation at a time. Now he knew better. Some storms needed to be heard before they could clear. And somewhere behind those clouds, thousands of passengers waited to fly unaware that soon their planes would stop too, not because of weather, but because one man had decided silence could no longer leave the ground. Morning light crept through the thin curtains of the hotel room. Naomi stirred awake, blinking at the pale glow that painted the ceiling. The storm had passed, but its memory still hung in the air, the kind of quiet after thunder that feels more uneasy than peaceful. She reached for her camera on the bedside table, half expecting to see it cracked from all the chaos. But it was fine. She turned it on, scrolled through the pictures from yesterday, and stopped at the one her father had admired. She didn't know why, but the words he'd said still lingered. That's why it's beautiful. In the next room, Malcolm sat at the small desk with a notepad open. Lines of thought filled the page, some crossed out, some circled twice. He had written and rewritten the same question. What changes a system, anger or action? His phone vibrated again. Jordan's voice came through. Sir, the board is asking questions. They're worried you're stepping into something political. Tell them it's not political. It's moral, Malcolm said evenly. With respect, sir. They might not see the difference. Then they'll learn, he replied, and hung up. He looked out the window at the clear blue Texas sky. Ironically, the flights had resumed after last night's storm, planes slicing through the morning air like nothing had happened. Yet something inside him refused to take off. He walked into Naomi's room and found her sitting on the bed, knees pulled close to her chest. Caleb sat on the floor, building a tower from hotel coasters. Both looked up when he entered. Pack your things, Malcolm said. We're going back to the airport. Naomi froze. What, why? Because the only thing worse than being silenced, he said quietly, is staying silent after. An hour later, they stood at the same terminal that had humiliated her less than 24 hours earlier. The hum of travelers filled the air again. New faces. Same system. Naomi's heart pounded. Dad, what are we doing here? She whispered. You're going to take pictures, he said, and I'm going to talk. Renee met them near the security line, eyes wide. Malcolm, what's your plan? He smiled faintly. To make them listen, the TSA officer at the checkpoint looked up in surprise when Malcolm approached. His presence carried weight, calm, authoritative, impossible to ignore. Sir, can I help you? You can start by helping me understand how a minor with a valid ID becomes a security threat, Malcolm said, voice low and measured. The officer hesitated. If there was a misunderstanding, I'm sure it's been corrected. No misunderstanding, Malcolm replied. A pattern. Naomi stood a few feet away, camera in hand. Her hands trembled slightly as she captured the moment the man behind the uniform. The father's calm confrontation. The airport lights reflecting off polished floors. For the first time, her lens felt like more than a tool. It was a witness. Renee gently touched her shoulder. You okay? Naomi nodded. I want people to see this, the real part of it. As they moved deeper into the terminal, whispers followed them. People recognized Malcolm from the viral video that had now spread to national news outlets. Reporters were already outside, cameras waiting. It wasn't just a family issue anymore. It had become a symbol. Meanwhile, in her corner office at AeroSky headquarters, Ellen Briggs watched the live coverage with a clenched jaw. He's doing this publicly, she asked her communications director. Yes, ma'am. Media's framing it as a stand for justice moment. The clip's trending again. Ellen sighed. Get ahead of it. Draft a statement saying we regret any inconvenience and are reviewing the situation. The director hesitated. That might not be enough this time. Ellen's tone hardened. It will have to be back at DFW. Malcolm spoke with quiet intensity to a small group of journalists. This isn't about one gate or one flight, he said. It's about who gets believed and who gets doubted by default. When suspicion is skin deep, trust never gets a boarding pass. The crowd went silent. Cameras clicked. His words landed with the weight of truth. Caleb tugged Naomi's sleeve. They're all watching Dad, Naomi whispered. Yeah. For once, they have to. Then something unexpected happened. The same gate agent from yesterday, C. Peterson, approached cautiously. Her face was pale, eyes heavy with guilt. Mr. Hayes, she said softly, can I speak with you? Malcolm turned, his expression unreadable. Go ahead. Her voice shook. I wanted to apologize. What happened yesterday? I should have stopped it. He looked at her for a long moment. Then why didn't you? She hesitated. Fear, I guess. Everyone follows the rules here, even when they're wrong. Naomi raised her camera, instinctively capturing the moment, the confession, the vulnerability. Malcolm's voice softened. It takes courage to admit that. Don't waste it. The conversation ended there, but the echo lingered. For Naomi, it wasn't about forgiveness. It was about being seen. Hours later, after reporters dispersed and passengers moved on, Malcolm sat alone near the large windows overlooking the runway. His reflection merged with the departing planes. He knew this wasn't over. This wasn't about one apology or one viral story. Systems didn't crumble overnight. They resisted, reshaped, pretended. He closed his eyes for a moment, hearing his father's voice from years ago. Don't raise your voice, son. Raise your value. Those words had guided him through every boardroom, every negotiation. But today, he understood a deeper version. Sometimes raising value meant grounding comfort. Back home in Atlanta, Clara watched the news from the kitchen table. The anchor's voice was calm but charged. SkyNova CEO confronts racial bias at rival airline industry forced to respond. She pressed her hand to her heart. Her husband's face appeared on the screen, composed, dignified, tired. She whispered to the empty room, "You always carry the weight of more than yourself." As evening fell, Malcolm received a call from an unfamiliar number. When he answered, Ellen's voice came through. "You've made your point. What do you want?" He paused. "Change. Real change." "That's vague," she said coldly. "Then let me be clear. Retrain your staff. Redefine your policy. And start by saying her name, the girl your company humiliated." Ellen sighed. "You're asking me to admit liability on record." "I'm asking you to admit humanity," he replied. There was silence on the line, the kind that stretches between two people who both know the world is watching. "Finally," Ellen said, "we'll review." He ended the call without another word. Naomi walked over and sat beside him, resting her head against his shoulder. "Did you fix it?" He looked at her camera in her lap. Still switched on, still recording faint red light. "Not yet," he said. "But I think we just started something that can't be ignored." Outside, the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the glass walls of the terminal in shades of amber and gold. The planes kept landing and taking off, indifferent as ever. But something invisible had shifted an echo inside that space, like the first tremor of a coming quake. Naomi lifted her camera and took one last picture, her father silhouetted against the setting sun. The reflection of planes gliding past his shoulders. The image captured the moment perfectly: quiet strength, steady resolve. A man who refused to let silence board another flight. The next morning arrived gray and heavy, like the city itself was holding its breath. Rain slicked the runways outside the window of the hotel, and each drop against the glass sounded like a quiet clock ticking towards something inevitable. Malcolm sat at the small dining table, dressed in a crisp dark suit. He didn't rush his coffee. Every move he made was deliberate, steady, the way a man prepares before walking into a storm. Naomi watched him from across the room, camera dangling from her wrist. She wanted to ask where he was going, but already knew the answer. Clara's voice came through the speakerphone, soft but edged with worry. "Are you sure about this?" Malcolm's tone was calm. "If not me, then who people will twist it? Mal, they'll call it personal revenge." He paused, eyes distant. "Let them call it what they want. I'm not looking for noise. I'm looking for correction." Naomi took a slow breath. "Do you think they'll listen this time?" He turned toward her, his expression gentle. "They might not listen today, but they'll remember tomorrow." He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder before leaving the room. Caleb watched him go, saying nothing, but in his eyes there was a kind of awe, a boy watching his father turn into something larger than life, and yet more human than ever. By mid-morning, Malcolm entered the SkyNova Command Center at Dallas's operations hub. Screens filled the walls, each flickering with flight paths, weather maps, crew logs. The staff turned in surprise as he walked in. He wasn't supposed to be there. A senior controller stepped forward nervously. "Sir, we didn't know you'd be visiting today." "I wasn't planning to," Malcolm replied. But today isn't a day for planning. It's a day for decisions. He stood before the main display, hands clasped behind his back. How many codeshare flights with AeroSky are currently active? The controller blinked, confused. About 47, sir. Why, Malcolm's voice was soft, but it carried across the room like a bell. Ground them, immediately. A murmur rippled through the staff. Sir, that would disrupt passengers, I'm aware. His gaze didn't waver. Do it anyway. Every joint operation with AeroSky halts until further notice. One young operator hesitated. Should we notify AeroSky Command? No. Let them notice the silence. Phones began to buzz. Supervisors whispered frantically into headsets. One by one, the screen shifted from green to amber to red. Delayed, delayed, delayed. The air in the room thickened, the weight of what was happening slowly dawning on everyone present. Outside, on the tarmac, AeroSky planes began rolling back to their gates. Passengers stared out windows, confused. Flight attendants made careful, practiced announcements about technical coordination issues, but everyone knew something unusual was unfolding. Within 30 minutes, the story hit the media again. SkyNova suspends all operations with AeroSky following discrimination controversy. The headline pulsed across television screens in airports nationwide. In her glass office, Ellen Briggs froze as her assistant read the alert aloud. He grounded them, she said, incredulous. Yes, ma'am, every shared flight. SkyNova's system isn't taking connections. Ellen's face hardened. Get Hayes on the phone right now. Back at the operations hub. Malcolm's phone vibrated. He answered without looking at the caller ID. Ellen's voice spilled out, sharp and controlled. Malcolm, what are you doing? You can't just shut down flights between two national carriers. I can, he said evenly. And I did. This isn't how professionals handle disputes. He leaned against the console, voice low and measured. Then maybe professionalism has gone soft. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her tone. You're holding passengers hostage to make a point? No. Ellen, I'm holding a mirror to your system. If it cracks, that's not on me. There was a long silence. Finally, she said, you're making this personal. I told you yesterday, Malcolm replied. It was personal the moment a child had to prove her worth to board a plane. Then he hung up. Around him, his staff worked quietly, every keystroke an act of both duty and disbelief. Some admired him, others feared the consequences, yet no one dared to question his resolve. By noon, the nation was watching. News anchors spoke his name like a headline turned myth. Pundits debated whether he was a hero or a reckless executive. Hashtags surged online. Grounded for justice. Hayes stand in Atlanta. Clara watched the coverage, anxiety curling in her chest. Her phone buzzed with messages from friends, reporters, old colleagues. He's all over the news. What's he doing? She typed one reply to all he's doing. What's right? At DFW. Naomi stood at the window of the hotel, gazing down at the idle planes. For the first time, she felt the scale of her father's decision. She whispered to herself, he really did it. Caleb joined her, pressing his forehead to the glass. It's like the whole world stopped because of us. Naomi shook her head gently. Not because of us, Caleb, because of what happened to us. Meanwhile, inside SkyNova's temporary Dallas office, Malcolm called an emergency meeting with his senior advisors via video conference. The faces on the screen were tense. Malcolm, one board member began, this decision affects millions in revenue. We need to talk damage control. There's no damage control for doing what's right. He answered, shareholders will panic. Then they'll remember what kind of company they invested in, he replied. One that believes a boarding pass isn't a measure of humanity. Another executive sighed. You're forcing AeroSky to negotiate under public pressure. That's dangerous. Malcolm's tone sharpened. So is complacency. As the meeting ended, Jordan entered the room carrying a folder. Sir, CNN wants a statement. So does the Wall Street Journal. Malcolm walked to the window, eyes fixed on the horizon, where grounded planes lined up like soldiers waiting for orders. Write this down, he said. We're not canceling flights. We're clearing airspace for change. Jordan's eyebrows lifted slightly. Impressed. That'll trend in an hour. It's not meant to trend. Malcolm replied. It's meant to mean something. By evening, the pressure was mounting. The Department of Transportation requested an explanation. Investors demanded a timeline. Ellen called again, her tone no longer sharp but weary. Malcolm, I can't ignore this. You're forcing my hand. That's the point, he said. You can't ignore it anymore. Outside, the storm clouds were gathering again over Dallas, dark and wide. Lightning flashed on the horizon, and for a brief moment, the reflection lit his face in the glass. He looked almost serene. Naomi entered quietly, barefoot, wearing one of Clara's oversized sweaters. Mom says the news won't stop calling. He smiled faintly. They'll get bored soon enough. I don't think so, she said, sitting beside him. You stopped planes. Dad. People don't forget that. He looked down at her camera, resting on the coffee table. Did you get any good shots today? Not yet, but maybe tomorrow. He nodded. Then tomorrow. Take a picture of the sky. Even when it's still. They sat in silence, watching raindrops trace slow paths down the glass. The world outside was restless, but inside, something rare existed clarity. Malcolm knew there would be fallout, consequences he couldn't yet predict. But he also knew this was the moment he'd been unconsciously walking toward his whole life. The moment a man decides the weight of quiet power is heavier than fear. And as the storm began to break again, the lights of 1,000 waiting planes flickered like stars refusing to fade. The following morning began with a silence that felt unnatural. Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, usually a storm of motion, had become an ocean of waiting. Rows of planes sat idle under a rising sun, their wings glittering like patient steel. Inside the terminal, announcements repeated on loop. Passengers spoke in hushed confusion, and every television was tuned to the same headline: SkyNova CEO grounds flights, nation reacts. At the hotel across the street, Malcolm Hayes stood by the window, the world below reflected in his tired eyes. The night had offered him little rest. He had expected resistance, but not the sheer stillness of a country forced to pause. For decades he had watched people move through airports like clockwork, each departure and arrival a heartbeat of progress. Now, because of him, the heart had stopped. Naomi entered quietly, her camera hanging by her side. They're talking about you on every channel, she said softly. I figured they would. Malcolm replied. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it, like a note held too long. Some say you're a hero, she continued. Others say you're crazy. He turned from the window, meeting her gaze. History doesn't ask permission from comfort. Clara called soon after. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from fatigue. The reporters are outside the house. Malcolm. They keep asking if you're going to resign. He smiled faintly. They always ask that before they ask what's right. Just be careful, she said. I know what you're doing, but this world eats people who try to fix it. He closed his eyes for a moment. Then I'll let it chew, but it won't swallow. Down in the lobby. The air buzzed with reporters. When Malcolm stepped out, microphones rose like metal flowers. Mr. Hayes, what do you say to passengers stranded nationwide? Do you believe grounding flights is an ethical response? Are you using your power for justice or revenge? He paused before the doors opened, his expression unreadable. I didn't ground flights, he said. I grounded silence. Then he walked past them without looking back. Inside SkyNova's Dallas command office, chaos reigned. Jordan Lee intercepted calls from federal regulators, airline executives, and investors demanding clarity. Sir, the Department of Transportation wants a statement within the hour, Jordan said as Malcolm entered. Then they'll get one. Malcolm replied. He stepped into the briefing room where cameras were already rolling. Dozens of employees watched from behind glass. He didn't need notes. His words came with a rhythm of conviction. I know this decision inconvenienced thousands. He began. I know people are angry, confused, maybe even afraid. But for some, fear is the price of every journey. Yesterday, my daughter learned what millions live every day, the humiliation of being questioned for existing in the wrong color, at the wrong counter, by the wrong person with power. That humiliation doesn't delay your flight. It cancels your humanity. The room was silent. Even the hum of machines seemed to fade. He continued, softer now. I grounded flights because I wanted this country to feel just for one day what it's like when progress stops because of prejudice. If the world must pause to look at itself, then so be it. The speech streamed live, shared instantly across networks. Some praised him for courage. Others accused him of corporate terrorism, but no one could ignore him. At AeroSky headquarters, Ellen Briggs watched from her office, jaw clenched. The room around her was thick with tension. Get legal on the line, she ordered. He's holding us hostage with morals. Her communications chief hesitated. Ma'am, the public's siding with him. Our inbox is flooded with support for SkyNova's stand. Hashtags are trending globally. Ellen's patience cracked. I don't run a company by hashtags. But this one might run you, he said quietly. Meanwhile, Naomi and Caleb sat together in the hotel lounge, watching their father's speech on TV. For the first time, Caleb looked at him not just as dad, but as something else, a man who could stop the world without raising his voice. Do you think he's scared? Caleb asked. Naomi thought for a moment. He's not scared of people. He's scared of what happens if nobody changes. Later that afternoon, Malcolm returned to the hotel. He looked exhausted, but his movements were still deliberate. Naomi followed him to the balcony. You didn't tell me you were going to speak. I didn't plan to, he said, but silence grows teeth if you feed it too long. She smiled faintly. You sound like Mom when she lectures us. He laughed quietly. Maybe I've been listening to her more than I thought. Then his phone buzzed a number he didn't recognize. He hesitated before answering. This is Hayes. Ellen's voice came through, strained. We need to talk. In person. Are you ready to listen this time? He asked. She hesitated. I'm ready to negotiate. Malcolm's tone cooled. There's a difference. Come to AirSky HQ tomorrow, she said finally. You'll have my full attention. We'll see if that's enough. He replied and ended the call. That night, Naomi couldn't sleep. She scrolled through social media, watching the storm her father had unleashed. One video caught her eye, a woman in uniform, crying softly, saying, "I work for Aerosky. And what happened to that girl? That's not just one mistake. It happens every day." Naomi watched it twice, her heart tightening. For the first time, she realized her father's stand wasn't just about her. It was about thousands of faces she'd never see. She crept into his room, finding him sitting at the desk, still awake. Papers covered the table, drafts, notes, headlines. "Dad," she said softly. He looked up, eyes tired but warm. "Can't sleep. Neither can you." He smiled. "The truth has a way of keeping you up." She hesitated, then whispered, "I saw a video from one of their workers. She agreed with you." He nodded slowly. "Change always starts with the quiet ones. Do you think Ellen will actually listen?" He leaned back, exhaling. "She'll have to." The ground beneath her feet is shifting. Outside, thunder rolled far away, faint and lingering. Naomi picked up her camera from the desk and held it toward the window. "What are you taking pictures of at midnight?" Malcolm asked. "The world." "When it's holding its breath," she answered. He chuckled softly, pride and sorrow mixing in his chest. "Then capture it well. One day, people will want to remember what silence looked like before it spoke." By dawn, reporters were camped outside again, helicopters circling over the still airport. The world was waiting for a response from Aerosky, for a glimpse of what would happen next. Malcolm dressed quietly, straightening his tie in the mirror. Naomi watched him. "You're really going to meet her?" "Yes." "What if she tries to spin it? Make it about politics?" He smiled faintly. "Then I'll remind her it's about people." She hugged him tightly before he left, whispering, "Make them see us." "Dad." He placed a hand on her head. "I will." As he stepped outside, cameras flashed. Voices shouted questions. And rain began to fall again, soft but steady. He didn't run. He walked through it, coat dampening, shoes echoing on the pavement. Each step felt heavier than the last, yet his expression never broke. Because he knew the next move wasn't just about an airline. It was about who got to soar and who was still told to wait at the gate. And in that quiet march through the storm, Malcolm Hayes was no longer just a CEO. He was a man carrying the collective weight of every denied boarding pass that had ever whispered, "Not this time." The drive to Aerosky headquarters cut through the center of Dallas, where the morning light glinted off towers of mirrored glass. Malcolm sat in the back of the car, eyes closed, letting the rhythm of the road steady him. His mind was quiet, but his pulse carried a weight he couldn't hide. Jordan Lee sat in the front passenger seat, phone in hand, whispering updates. "Sir, the press is camped outside the building. Ellen Briggs has already arrived with her legal team. They're expecting you at 10 sharp." Malcolm didn't open his eyes. "They're expecting a show," he said softly. "We'll give them truth instead." Outside, the city was waking up to headlines that blared across every screen. CEO showdown, Hayes versus Briggs. The nation was divided, yet captivated. For some, Malcolm was a symbol of justice. For others, he was the man who had dared to stop progress to make a point. But to him, this wasn't about public opinion. It was about principle. When the car stopped, flashes erupted from a swarm of cameras. Reporters shouted questions as he stepped out, raincoat draped across his arm, expression unreadable. "Mr. Hayes, will SkyNova resume flights today?" Someone yelled, "Do you believe Aerosky's bias is intentional?" Another asked. He said nothing, walking straight through the revolving glass doors. The building's marble lobby reflected him like a calm shadow. Ellen Briggs was waiting on the top floor, standing before a wall of windows that looked out over the grounded runways. Her reflection blended with the city behind her, a woman who had built an empire of steel but now faced its cracks. She turned as he entered. "Malcolm," she said coolly, "you've certainly made my week complicated." He removed his coat, placed it neatly on the chair beside him, and met her gaze. "Good morning, Ellen." Complications tend to reveal character. She motioned to the conference table. Around it sat her advisors, legal counsel, PR directors, financial officers, each with laptops open and faces tense. "Let's skip the small talk," she said. "Your decision has caused hundreds of cancellations and millions in losses, not just for AeroSky, but for SkyNova too. If you're trying to teach me a lesson, congratulations. You've succeeded in creating chaos." Malcolm didn't raise his voice. "Chaos," he said, "is what happens when order protects injustice." Ellen leaned forward. "I'm not here to debate philosophy. I'm here to find a solution." He nodded slowly. "Then start with the truth." One of her lawyers cleared his throat. "Miss Hayes, our internal review found no evidence of discrimination. The agent in question followed standard security protocol." "Protocol," Malcolm repeated softly, "is a polite word for blindness when it benefits you." Ellen's jaw tightened. "You think you can stand on principle while holding an entire industry hostage? That's arrogance, not leadership." He met her stare without blinking. "Arrogance is pretending neutrality in the face of harm. Leadership is calling it by its name." For a moment, the room was still. Outside, a plane thundered overhead, one of the few not grounded. Its shadow slid across the glass wall like a passing thought. Ellen broke the silence first. "What do you want?" "Malcolm, an apology. A press statement with your daughter's name on it." He shook his head. "I want reform. Be specific." He reached into his briefcase and placed a folder on the table. "This is what I call the Equal Sky Protocol. It includes mandatory anti-bias training, anonymous reporting systems for passenger discrimination, a third-party oversight board with community representation, and a public audit of all passenger incidents by demographic." The executives exchanged uneasy glances. Ellen flipped through the pages, scanning the details. "You're asking us to admit guilt? I'm asking you to recognize harm." Her voice sharpened. "And if I refuse," Malcolm stood slowly, "then every SkyNova partnership with AeroSky remains grounded. And I'll make sure every airline, every regulator, every passenger knows why." Ellen's PR director whispered urgently in her ear, "Public sentiment's turning fast. If we don't respond soon, stockholders will panic." Ellen waved him off, her eyes still on Malcolm. "You've always been a strategist," she said. "I underestimated that." He smiled faintly. "No, you underestimated what silence cost." She turned toward the window, arms crossed. "Do you have any idea what kind of precedent this sets? If every CEO grounded operations for every moral outrage, nothing would fly." He looked out beside her. "Maybe that's the point. Some things shouldn't take off until we fix what's broken on the ground." For the first time, her composure cracked. The woman who had built her success on control was now staring at a man who'd taken control away without raising his voice. She sighed. "If I agree to your conditions, will you lift the grounding when you implement them? Not before." Her eyes narrowed. "You're not negotiating. You're dictating." He nodded once. "No, I'm defining standards." The room fell silent again. Outside, rain began to streak the glass. One of the younger AeroSky executives spoke up hesitantly. "Maybe he's right," he said. "We can't keep pretending this doesn't happen." Ellen turned sharply toward him, but the moment had shifted. The power in the room no longer belonged entirely to her. She closed the folder with a snap. "You'll have your answer by tomorrow." "I'll expect action by tomorrow," he replied, picking up his coat. Words already failed at gate B-19. As he left, the tension followed him down the corridor like an echo. Jordan met him near the elevator. "How did it go?" Malcolm exhaled slowly. "She heard me. Whether she listened, that's tomorrow's story." Back at the hotel, Naomi was waiting in the lobby. She jumped up when she saw him. "So, what happened?" He smiled, weary but calm. "We gave them a choice: dignity or delay. Which do you think they'll pick?" He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Depends on how much they've learned to live without the first one." That evening, Clara called again. "You look tired," she said, after hearing his voice. "I'm fine. You always say that. When you're not." He chuckled softly. "You know me too well. I married a man who fights with silence," she said. "But sometimes silence needs rest too." "I'll rest when they see her," he said. Later, Naomi sat beside him by the window, both watching lightning flicker in the distance. "Dad?" she asked. "Yes. Why didn't you yell at them? You could have. You had every right." He smiled gently. "Because loud doesn't always change minds. But quiet, steady truth, it lingers. It forces reflection." She nodded, then raised her camera and took a photo of his reflection against the window. "What's that one called?" he asked. She grinned. "The Man Who Made the Sky, Listen." He looked at her, truly smiled this time, and for a moment the exhaustion left his face. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon, not as a warning, but as a response. And though he didn't know it yet, by morning, Ellen Briggs would walk into her boardroom carrying that same folder, his Equal Sky protocol, and the storm would finally start to move in their favor. Morning light spilled through the hotel window, soft and uncertain, as if the sun itself was hesitant to rise after what had happened. The world outside was still quiet, but not calm. It was the kind of quiet before history decides which direction to turn. Malcolm Hayes sat at the edge of the bed, shirt sleeves rolled up, tie hanging loose around his neck. His phone buzzed relentlessly beside him, messages from board members, reporters, regulators, even politicians. He ignored them all. Naomi entered, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "You didn't sleep, did you?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Sleep's for people who already know how the story ends." She handed him a cup and sat beside him. "Do you think she'll do it, Ellen?" "She's too smart not to," he said, though his voice carried more hope than certainty. "But smart doesn't always mean brave." Downstairs, Jordan Lee waited in the lobby, pacing with a tablet in hand. "Sir," he said as Malcolm approached, "AeroSky's board is meeting right now. The press is saying this could become a landmark case if it escalates. Also, the president just commented." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "What did he say?" Jordan hesitated, then read from the screen. "We must ensure fairness in every institution, even in the skies." It's vague, but supportive. Malcolm took a sip of coffee. Politicians always test the wind before they take flight. Across the city, inside AeroSky's boardroom, Ellen Briggs stood at the head of the table, the Equal Sky protocol folder open in front of her. Her legal counsel looked grim, her financial officers impatient. "This is madness," one executive said. "If we accept these terms, it's an admission of guilt." Ellen didn't respond immediately. She looked at the rain streaking down the windows. the same rain that had fallen when Naomi was denied boarding. "Maybe guilt is overdue," she said quietly. Her words silenced the room. One of her advisors leaned forward. "Ellen, this could change how the entire airline industry operates. Training, auditing, public transparency. It's revolutionary." She looked up. Then maybe revolution is the only flight worth taking. By noon, the decision was made. The news broke before Malcolm even received her call. AeroSky announces historic Equal Sky Initiative, CEO Ellen Briggs Partners with SkyNova on reform. The story flashed across every major outlet. Naomi saw it first and ran down the hallway. "Dad," she shouted, bursting into his room. She said yes. "It's everywhere." Malcolm stared at the screen, the words blurring for a moment before settling into focus. His chest rose slowly, a deep breath that seemed to release weeks, no, years of quiet restraint. She listened. He murmured. Naomi grinned. "No, Dad, you made her listen." They met later that afternoon at AeroSky headquarters again, this time with cameras allowed inside. Reporters lined the lobby, their flashes reflecting off the polished marble like lightning. Malcolm and Ellen stood side by side before a podium. She spoke first. "Yesterday, the skies stopped. Today, they open again with purpose. We at AeroSky acknowledge our failures, both spoken and silent. From this day forward, we commit to the Equal Sky Initiative, a partnership with SkyNova and the Department of Transportation to ensure equity, transparency, and accountability in every seat, every policy, every flight." The room erupted in applause, though not everyone's was genuine. Some clapped for image, some for hope, but for the first time, words that had once been empty carried weight. When it was Malcolm's turn, he stepped to the podium and paused. Cameras zoomed in. He didn't look at Ellen or the journalists. He looked straight ahead, as if speaking to the millions watching at home. "I didn't want headlines," he said softly. "I wanted healing. What happened to my daughter was not unique. It was a reflection of how invisible some people still are when they should be seen most clearly. Today is not victory, it's accountability. The difference is subtle, but everything depends on it." He looked at Ellen then, and to those who stood in silence until now, welcome to the conversation. Let's make sure it never ends. After the press conference, the two CEOs stood by the window, away from the cameras. Outside, planes were finally moving again. Ellen sighed. "I never thought I'd see this day." "Not like this." Malcolm nodded. "Neither did I." "You know this doesn't fix everything," she said. "It doesn't have to," he replied. "It just has to start." Meanwhile, Naomi was sitting with Caleb in the waiting area, camera in hand, filming the moment when the first flight took off again. Passengers clapped softly as the plane ascended, a quiet symbol of motion restored. Caleb leaned against her shoulder. "Do you think people will be nicer now?" Naomi smiled sadly. "Maybe not right away, but maybe they'll think twice before they aren't." Back home in Atlanta, Clara watched the live broadcast. When she saw her husband on screen, standing with calm conviction beside the woman who had once dismissed him, tears welled in her eyes. She whispered to herself, "You didn't just ground flights, Malcolm. You grounded the world long enough to make it look in the mirror." That evening, the family flew back home together. As the plane rose above the clouds, Naomi looked out the window. The sky was endless, soft, and golden. She lifted her camera and captured the moment her father's silhouette against the window, eyes closed, face peaceful. It was the image she had been searching for all along, When they landed, the terminal was filled with people who recognized them. Some clapped, others nodded silently. A few even stopped to say thank you. One elderly woman pressed Naomi's hand gently and whispered, "Your father reminded us that dignity doesn't need permission." Later that night, at home, Malcolm sat on the porch with Clara. Fireflies blinked across the lawn, and the hum of crickets filled the warm Georgia air. She poured him a glass of tea and said softly, "You realize what you've done, don't you?" He smiled. "I stopped a few planes." She shook her head. "You changed the air they fly through." He chuckled quietly, but his eyes were distant. "There's still so much left to do." "There always is," she said. "But tonight, breathe. You earned it." Inside, Naomi uploaded the photo she had taken from the airplane window. She typed the caption, "When the sky finally listened." Within hours, it went viral. As the comments poured in messages from people across the country, from flight attendants, passengers, parents, and children, Naomi scrolled through them slowly. One message stood out. "I was on that flight. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible." She looked over at her father through the open porch door. He sat quietly, his hand resting over Clara's, the night settling around them like a well-earned peace. For once, there was no need to speak. The world outside was learning the language of stillness he had always understood. Tomorrow would bring new questions, new critics, and new work. But tonight, for one brief, fragile moment, the world above and below the clouds felt level, and somewhere, far beyond the city lights, the same sky that had once divided them finally held them all in equal silence. The morning after their return to Atlanta dawned warm and golden, the kind of light that made everything seem softer, calmer. But inside the Hayes home, a new kind of restlessness stirred. The air was heavy with something that wasn't quite peace, yet not fear, but the awareness that peace would now require vigilance. Malcolm sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee. Unread newspapers stacked beside him. Headlines screamed his name in bold letters. "Malcolm Hayes reshapes aviation ethics." "The SkyNova Stan Revolution, a risk-equal sky initiative, takes flight." He skimmed none of it. The praise, the criticism, the analysis, they all blended into noise. He had never done it for the noise. Naomi came downstairs with her camera slung over her shoulder, her hair still messy from sleep. "Dad, there are reporters outside again," she said, peeking through the window. "They're camped on the sidewalk." "Let them," he replied, not looking up from his coffee. She frowned. "They keep asking if you're planning to run for office." He finally glanced at her, a faint smile in his eyes. "Tell them I already have a job that matters." Clara entered the kitchen with her usual quiet grace, setting a plate of toast on the table. "The world doesn't stop, even when you make it pause," she said gently. "You'll have to decide what comes next." "I'm deciding," Malcolm said, his voice steady. "Just slowly." The phone buzzed again, Jordan's name flashing on the screen. Malcolm answered, his tone shifting immediately into focus. "Talk to me." "Sir, the Equal Sky Protocol is being reviewed by Congress for potential adoption as an industry standard," Jordan said. "It's spreading faster than we expected." Malcolm was silent for a long moment. "That's good," he said finally. "But good isn't safe. Make sure it's protected. People will try to water it down." "I'll handle it," Jordan promised. Later that morning, Naomi accompanied her father to SkyNova headquarters. The lobby was quieter than usual, employees nodding respectfully as he passed. For years, he had walked through these halls as a leader. Today, He walked through them as a symbol, and symbols, he knew, could be both powerful and dangerous. They reached his office, sleek, modern, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered, alive with motion. Naomi gazed out, whispering, "It's strange to think people up there are flying because of you." He smiled softly. "No, they're flying because people decided fairness should travel too." A knock interrupted them. Jordan entered with a small group of visitors, a delegation from the Department of Transportation, cameras trailing behind. "Mr. Hayes," said one of the officials, "on behalf of the administration, we'd like to formally commend you for your leadership." Malcolm nodded politely, offering his hand. "Thank you, but commendations don't change systems. Policies do." The official smiled awkwardly. "We're working on that." When they left, Naomi turned to him. "Do you ever get tired of fighting?" He took a deep breath. "Fighting doesn't tire me. Pretending everything's fine does." By midday, the news cycle shifted again. A new video was circulating, a recording of a flight attendant from Aerosky, who publicly thanked Malcolm for what he'd done. "We all felt it," the woman said tearfully. "The fear of speaking up, the exhaustion of pretending it's fine. Mr. Hayes didn't just stand up for his daughter. He stood up for all of us." The clip went viral within hours. Messages flooded SkyNova's social media accounts, stories from passengers, pilots, and airport workers sharing their own experiences, quiet discrimination. Naomi watched in awe as the ripple grew wider than any of them had imagined. "It's bigger than the planes now," she whispered. Malcolm nodded slowly. "It always was." That evening, he was invited to a televised forum on ethics and leadership. He almost declined, but Clara encouraged him. "Sometimes, people need to see the face behind the fight," she said, "not just the statement." Under the studio lights, Malcolm sat calmly while the moderator introduced him. "Our next guest is Malcolm Hayes, the man who grounded every flight to make the world look up." The audience applauded. He didn't smile. The first question came fast. "Mr. Hayes, critics say your actions cost millions and endangered trust in the airline industry. How do you justify that?" He leaned forward slightly. "Trust built on silence isn't trust, it's denial. If money is the price of integrity, then we've been underpaying for a long time." Another journalist asked, "Do you see yourself as an activist now?" He shook his head. "I see myself as a father who got tired of explaining to his children why dignity costs extra." The room was silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in applause. After the show, as the cameras powered down, a young technician approached him shyly. "Mr. Hayes, my sister works for Aerosky. She said everything's changing over there." She said, "Thank you." Malcolm placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Tell her to keep pushing. The system moves slow, but it moves." Later that night, he returned home exhausted. Naomi sat at the dining table, editing her photos. She looked up when he entered. "You did great," she said. "Did I?" he asked, loosening his tie. "People are listening now." He smiled faintly. "Listening is step one. Understanding is the real test." She turned her camera toward him. "Can I take one more picture?" He raised an eyebrow. "Another." "This one's different," she said softly. "This one's for me." He nodded. She lifted the camera. The shutter clicked once the sound clean and final. In that picture, he wasn't the CEO or the hero. He was just her father, sitting under the soft kitchen light, shoulders heavy but eyes steady. Before going to bed, Malcolm stepped outside onto the porch. The night was cool, the stars clear. He could hear the distant hum of a plane overhead, steady and calm. He thought of the countless lives intersecting above him, pilots, passengers, crew, all unaware that their flight paths carried a new kind of freedom. Clara joined him quietly, wrapping her arm around his. "You changed the sky," she said. He shook his head. "No. I reminded it to listen." For the first time in weeks, he felt something close to peace. But beneath it was still that restless pulse, the knowledge that peace, like flight, required constant balance. Inside, Naomi uploaded her final photo of the day to her private collection. She titled it, "The Man Who Grounded Heaven." It wasn't meant for the world, it was meant to remind her of the day her father taught the sky to speak. And somewhere far above their quiet home, as a jet traced a thin silver line across the night, it seemed as though the sky whispered back. 3 weeks had passed since the Equal Sky Initiative was launched, and the world had shifted in quiet but undeniable ways. Airport billboards now carried messages about dignity and fairness. Airlines announced updated diversity training, and flight attendants shared videos of new policies being tested. The movement had spread beyond aviation schools, corporations, and even government agencies began citing the equal sky principles as inspiration. Yet for Malcolm Hayes, the transformation that had begun with fury was now being met with the cold reality of consequence. The morning began with Jordan Lee entering his office holding a folder thick with documents. His expression was careful, almost reluctant. "Sir," he said, "I think you should see this." Malcolm looked up from his desk, the soft light of dawn spilling over piles of letters and reports. "What is it?" Jordan set the folder down. "Financials? The board's worried. Stockholders are calling for an internal review. Some claim your moral crusade cost SkyNova millions." Malcolm leaned back, the chair creaking beneath his weight. "I expected pushback. I didn't expect them to dress it in concern." Jordan hesitated. "They're also suggesting a vote of confidence next quarter. It's not a threat yet, but it's coming." Malcolm's eyes softened with quiet understanding. "You can't fix the sky without turbulence." Meanwhile, outside SkyNova headquarters, a group of demonstrators held signs. Some read "Hayes for Humanity," while others shouted, "Keep politics off our planes." The same man who had grounded silence was now a lightning rod for every conversation about race, ethics, and power. Later that day, Malcolm joined a meeting with his senior board members. The atmosphere was tense. The CFO, a sharp man named Eric Nolan, started first. "Malcolm, no one denies the importance of what you did, but you've crossed from leadership into activism, and that's dangerous for a business of this size." Malcolm folded his hands, his calm presence somehow disarming. "What's dangerous," he replied, "is pretending profit absolves principle." Eric frowned. "This isn't about absolution. It's about responsibility. You've made this company a target. I've made it accountable," Malcolm said. The discussion went on for an hour, voices rising, tempers flaring, but Malcolm never once raised his own. When the meeting ended, the boardroom was quiet except for the sound of papers shuffling. As everyone left, Jordan lingered behind. "You handled that well," he said softly. Malcolm gave a tired smile. "Handling it is the easy part. Living it, that's where it hurts." That evening, Naomi and Clara met him at home. The house was lit softly, a contrast to the storm of public life. Naomi had been editing a short documentary from her footage, the story of the day everything stopped. She showed him a clip on her laptop. The video opened with the image of two black girls at an airport window, Naomi and Caleb's reflection in the glass. A narrator's voice, calm and warm, spoke over the scene. Sometimes, change doesn't begin with shouting. It begins with a quiet refusal to move. Malcolm watched in silence, his throat tightening. "You made this?" he asked quietly. Naomi nodded. "I want people to feel what we felt that day. Not the anger, but the pause." Clara smiled softly. "She's her father's daughter." Later, as night settled, Malcolm sat outside on the porch. The air was cool, and the cicadas hummed softly in the distance. His phone buzzed again, an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something in him answered. "Mr. Hayes," a woman's voice said. "My name's Rachel. I work for Aerosky in customer relations. I just wanted to say thank you." He blinked, surprised. "You're welcome, but why call me directly?" "Because I was there that day," she said, "at gate B-19. I saw everything. I wanted to speak up, but I didn't. I've been thinking about it every night since. When I heard about the Equal Sky initiative, I joined the training team. We're rewriting the protocols. I guess I just needed to tell you it mattered." Malcolm's voice softened. "It mattered because you're making it matter now." After the call, he sat quietly, looking up at the stars. For the first time in weeks, the night sky didn't feel heavy. It felt alive. The next morning brought more storms. News broke that SkyNova's largest shareholder, an investment firm led by a man named Thomas Kincaid, was demanding a leadership review. "We admire Mr. Hayes' conviction," Kincaid said on live television, "but moral gestures don't pay dividends." The statement sent ripples through the business world. Analysts debated whether Malcolm's stand had gone too far. Some called him a visionary. Others called him reckless. At home, Naomi saw the news and frowned. "They're trying to make you look like the villain." Malcolm smiled sadly. "That's how every story sounds, before the ending changes." "But what if they try to take the company from you?" she asked. He reached over, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You can't take a company from someone who built it on conscience. You can only take the building." The following week, he received an invitation from Ellen Briggs. She wanted to host a joint event between Aerosky and SkyNova, a conference dedicated to ethical reform in aviation. "It's time." Her message read, "To show unity instead of opposition." When the day arrived, the event drew leaders from across industries. Malcolm stood beside Ellen again, though this time there was mutual respect in their silence. Cameras flashed as they shook hands. She turned to him quietly before stepping on stage. "I used to think strength was control," she said. "Now I think it's courage." He nodded. "Control builds walls. Courage builds wings." When Malcolm took the stage, his speech wasn't fiery, it was reflective. "Progress," he said, "isn't measured by how fast we move, but by who gets left behind when we do. Every plane that lifts off should remind us equality isn't altitude, it's access." The crowd rose to its feet. The applause was long, sincere, unforced. Naomi filmed it from the front row, her hands trembling slightly, not because of pride, but because she knew this wasn't the end. It was the middle of something bigger. That night, back in his hotel room, Malcolm sat alone once more, staring at the city lights flickering below. Jordan knocked softly and entered. "You did good today," he said. Malcolm smiled faintly. "Good isn't enough anymore." "Jordan, it never was." Jordan hesitated, then handed him an envelope. "This came for you. Handwritten, no sender." Malcolm opened it slowly. Inside was a single note in neat cursive. Thank you for reminding us that justice doesn't need permission to board. A passenger you never met. He read it twice, then folded it carefully. The city hummed below, planes gliding like stars reborn. For the first time, he didn't wonder how the world would remember him. He only hoped it would remember why. And as he turned off the light, Naomi's voice from the documentary echoed faintly in his mind. Sometimes, change begins with a quiet refusal to move. He smiled in the darkness. The sky, it seemed, had finally learned how to listen. A month later, Atlanta had returned to its usual rhythm, but the Hayes family's world had not. Every street Malcolm walked down now seemed to carry echoes of his own story, billboards quoting his words, strangers stopping to shake his hand, journalists still requesting one more interview. He accepted some, refused most. Fame, he knew, was only applause until silence returned. And silence was where the truth either lived or died. That morning, as the sun rose through the blinds of his office, Malcolm reviewed a stack of letters from employees across the country. Some were filled with gratitude pilots, attendants, engineers thanking him for giving them a voice, but others stung with resentment. You're ruining this industry. We used to fly without politics. You made it about race when it should be about service. He read every word, then folded the letters carefully into a drawer. Jordan entered moments later, carrying his tablet. "Sir, the board's review is scheduled for next week," he said quietly. "They'll decide whether you stay as CEO." Malcolm didn't look up. "I thought they already decided that when they chose silence over justice." Jordan hesitated. "You could fight it, rally the public. You have support." Malcolm smiled faintly. "Public favor is like weather. Warm today, cold tomorrow. I'll let my actions defend me." Meanwhile, Naomi was in her college editing lab, finishing her short documentary. The project had grown beyond her expectations. She'd been invited to submit it to a national student film festival. Her professor had called it a story that breathes empathy. Still, she hesitated. "It's not really about me." She told her friend. "It's about him, about what he carried." Her friend smiled. "Then it's about both of you. Back at home." Clara sat in the garden trimming her roses when Malcolm returned that evening. She could always read the weight on his shoulders before he spoke. "You've been quiet all week," she said softly. He took the seat beside her, exhaling deeply. "They're calling for a leadership vote. It'll be close." Clara set her scissors down and looked at him. "You knew this might happen." "I did," he admitted. "But knowing doesn't make it easier to watch them trade conscience for comfort." She reached for his hand. "You can't control their choices. Only your own." He squeezed her hand gently, finding calm in her steadiness. "Do you think I did the right thing, Clara?" he asked quietly. She smiled sadly. "I think you reminded the world that right and easy rarely sit together." The following days were filled with mounting tension. Business channels debated his legacy. Some investors painted him as reckless. Others called him a pioneer. The Equal Sky initiative had sparked a cultural shift that no one could reverse. But SkyNova's profits had dipped sharply in the short term. And that was all some people saw. On the eve of the vote, Malcolm sat alone in his office. The city lights glittered like distant constellations through the window. He opened his notebook and began to write not a speech, not a strategy, but a letter. "To those who will come after me," it began. "Remember this. You can measure altitude in miles, but dignity has no ceiling. The air that carries us is shared. Treat it that way." When he finished, he closed the notebook, placed it in the top drawer, and turned off the light. The next morning, SkyNova's board gathered in the executive conference hall. The room was sleek and cold, the walls lined with muted photographs of the company's history planes, pioneers, promises. Malcolm entered quietly, nodding to familiar faces, some friendly, some not. Thomas Kincaid, the investor who had spearheaded the review, stood to address the room. "This isn't personal," he began smoothly. "It's business. Leadership is about stability, not statements." Malcolm listened without interrupting. When Kincaid finished, he stood, buttoned his jacket, and spoke with measured calm. "When I grounded those flights, I didn't do it to make headlines. I did it because I couldn't tell my daughter that silence was safety. If leadership is measured only in profit, then perhaps I'm not your leader. But if it's measured in purpose, then I've already done my job." The vote began, one by one. Hands raised, some hesitantly, some firmly. When it ended, the room was silent. Jordan, seated in the corner, met Malcolm's gaze and gave a small nod. The count was close, too close, but the verdict was clear. Malcolm Hayes was no longer CEO of SkyNova Airlines. He exhaled slowly, as if releasing years of air he'd held inside. No anger, no bitterness, just a deep, steady calm. He shook hands with those who approached him, even Kincaid. "No hard feelings," he said. "I'll still be flying, just differently." When he walked out of the building, the afternoon sun was waiting for him bright, unflinching, alive. Naomi was outside, camera in hand, eyes wide. "Dad," she asked, her voice trembling. He smiled. "They voted, and they made their choice." Her eyes filled. "I'm so sorry." He shook his head gently. "Don't be. Change doesn't always need a title. It just needs persistence." She hugged him tightly, burying her face against his chest. "What will you do now?" He looked past her, toward the horizon where planes carved thin silver lines into the blue. "Something quieter," he said. "Something lasting." Later that night, the news broke Malcolm Hayes steps down as SkyNova CEO leaves legacy of reform. Commentators dissected his every word, but none of them could define the quiet dignity with which he left. At home, Clara met him at the door with a knowing smile. "You're free now," she said softly. He nodded, the weight slowly lifting. "Freedom's strange. It doesn't always feel like victory." "It rarely does," she replied. In the following weeks, Malcolm began working with several nonprofit organizations, helping create scholarships for underrepresented students pursuing aviation careers. The Equal Sky Foundation, co-founded by him and Ellen Briggs, began taking shape, an alliance dedicated to ensuring fairness in all travel industries. One evening, he received a call from Ellen. "It's ironic, isn't it?" she said. "You lost your title, but gained influence no one can buy." He chuckled softly. Maybe that's what real altitude looks like. Meanwhile, Naomi's documentary was accepted into the National Film Festival. She invited her parents to the premiere, insisting it was their story as much as hers. When the lights dimmed and the first frame appeared, her reflection on the airport glass, Malcolm felt tears burn his eyes. The audience sat spellbound as the story unfolded: the denial, the defiance, the grounding, the reform, and then, the final scene, a quiet porch, fireflies blinking in the dusk, his voice layered over hers saying, "The sky doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to everyone brave enough to rise." When the credits rolled, the theater erupted in applause. Naomi turned toward her father. "It's yours too. You know," she whispered. He smiled, placing an arm around her shoulders. "No, sweetheart, it's ours. Outside the theater, as night spread across the city, a single plane crossed overhead, its lights small but steady, gliding through the dark. Malcolm looked up and whispered under his breath, "Keep flying," because even without wings, he knew he'd already changed the air forever. Autumn crept quietly into Atlanta, painting the trees with gold and rust. The air was cooler now, softer, carrying that scent of change that always reminded Malcolm Hayes of transition, the kind that never asked for permission, but always came anyway. It had been 2 months since his resignation, but life had not slowed down. If anything, it had become fuller, quieter, but fuller in ways he hadn't expected. Every morning, he still woke before dawn, made his coffee, and watched the planes rise through the clouds beyond his porch. There was a steadiness to that view, an unspoken reminder that motion continues, even when the pilot changes. One morning, Naomi joined him on the porch, her laptop open. "They accepted my film into the National Festival circuit," she said. Excitement and disbelief tangled in her voice. He smiled, the warmth of her joy reaching him like sunlight. "You're taking off, Naomi." She laughed. "Guess I got that from you." He shook his head gently. "No, you got it from your mother. I just showed you what it means to fly for the right reasons." Later that day, Malcolm attended a meeting with the Equal Sky Foundation, the nonprofit he and Ellen Briggs had built together. The foundation had grown faster than either expected. Its programs had reached schools, airports, and training academies across the country. Ellen joined the meeting via video call from Chicago. Her tone, once sharp and defensive, was now tempered by humility. The Senate's Transportation Committee just endorsed the Equal Sky Certification Program. She said, "We're making real policy. Malcolm," he smiled faintly, "it's strange, isn't it? The very thing that almost ended us might end up defining us." Ellen nodded. "That's the price of awakening. It never comes cheap." After the call, Jordan handed Malcolm a folder. "Letters," he said, "from kids in the scholarship program." Malcolm opened the first one. The handwriting was uneven but earnest. "Dear Mr. Hayes, I never thought someone like me could become a pilot. You changed that." He closed the letter quietly, pressing it to his chest for a moment before setting it down. "Jordan," he said, "sometimes leadership begins after the office lights go out." That evening, Clara hosted a small dinner at home. Old friends gathered, some from SkyNova, some from the community. Laughter filled the house, but beneath it, a tenderness lingered, the kind that comes only after long storms. When the plates were cleared and the conversation slowed, Clara looked across the table at her husband. "You've been quieter lately," she said softly. Malcolm smiled. "I'm learning to listen more. The world's got enough noise already." Later that night, Naomi showed him an email she'd received. "Dad, look, the Smithsonian's Aviation Museum wants to include part of my documentary in their new exhibit about civil rights and travel." He blinked, speechless for a moment. "That's incredible, Naomi." She grinned. "They want you to record a short message to play with it. About what you did." He chuckled. "What I did was stop a few planes." "What you did," she said firmly, "was give people permission to believe they could fly without apology." The next day, Malcolm sat in front of a small camera in his home office, the same desk where the storm had begun. Naomi adjusted the focus. "Just talk," she said, "like you would to anyone sitting across from you." He nodded, took a breath, and began. "My name is Malcolm Hayes. For most of my life, I believed the sky was the one place that didn't judge, that when you were up there, above the clouds. It didn't matter what you looked like or where you came from. But one day, I learned that even the sky can carry the weight of what we bring to it. So I stopped the planes not to make a point, but to make a pause big enough for us to look at each other again. To remember that travel isn't just about destinations, it's about dignity. If I did anything right, it was believing that humanity deserves a window seat on every flight. He paused, emotion catching faintly in his throat, and if I did anything wrong, maybe it was waiting so long to act. But change doesn't always come on time. It just comes when we refuse to stay seated. Naomi lowered the camera slowly, eyes glistening. That was perfect. He smiled softly. It wasn't perfect. It was honest. A week later, they traveled to Washington, D.C. for the exhibit's opening. The museum was vast, filled with models of planes, photos of pioneers, and now a section dedicated to equality in aviation. Naomi's short film played on a looping screen, surrounded by photographs from airports around the world. In the center, a plaque read, "The Equal Sky Initiative." When silence was grounded, so fairness could fly. As they walked through the gallery, Malcolm saw people watching the footage with quiet reverence. Strangers of every color, age, and language. One little boy tugged at his mother's hand and whispered, "That's him, isn't it? The man who stopped the planes." Malcolm knelt down, smiling. "I just reminded them to look where they were flying." "Son." Afterward, Ellen found him near the exit. "You know, I used to think legacy was about what people remember of you," she said. "Now I think it's about what people continue without you." He nodded. Then we're both doing something right. That night, back at the hotel, Malcolm stood on the balcony overlooking the Potomac. The city lights shimmered below, reflected on the calm river. Clara stepped beside him, wrapping her shawl tighter. "You've built something that will outlive you," she said softly. He exhaled, the cool air carrying his words like smoke. "That's the goal, not fame, not power, just endurance." Naomi joined them, her phone buzzing in her hand. "Dad, look at this." She showed him a social media post from an Aerosky flight attendant, a selfie in uniform, smiling proudly beneath a caption, "Today, I boarded the plane I once feared, because someone decided we all deserve the sky." Malcolm's eyes softened. That's the real altitude right there. As the night deepened, they stayed together on the balcony. The hum of the city below blending with the distant echo of planes crossing overhead. For once, the sound didn't remind Malcolm of burden. It reminded him of promise. He looked at Naomi, then at Clara, and thought of the journey that had begun with humiliation and ended in healing not perfect, not complete, but real. "You know," he said quietly, "the thing about the sky is, it never holds grudges. It just keeps waiting for us to rise the right way." And as another plane arced across the horizon, its lights blinking in the vast dark, he smiled, not at what he had done, but at what was still possible, because for the first time in his life, Malcolm Hayes knew that the air he was leaving behind was lighter than when he found it. Winter crept in with its quiet grayness, soft but unrelenting, wrapping Atlanta in a calm that felt earned. The cold mornings made Malcolm Hayes rise later now, though his habits hadn't changed much. He still brewed his coffee just before sunrise, still stood by the window as the city stirred awake. But something in his rhythm had softened, not slowed, just deepened, like a man who had learned to walk without rushing toward purpose. Outside, frost glazed the garden. Clara tended all summer, from the kitchen. He could hear her humming an old gospel tune she sang whenever life felt steady again. He leaned against the counter, watching her stir oatmeal on the stove. "That song again?" he asked, his voice still rough from sleep. She smiled without turning. "It's the song I sing when we've made it through." He walked over, kissed her forehead gently. "Then maybe we should frame it." The Equal Sky Foundation was thriving beyond expectation. Their offices had moved downtown, just a few blocks from SkyNova's old headquarters. Ironically, the new SkyNova CEO had begun adopting some of Malcolm's principles publicly, though without giving him credit. Jordan found it amusing. Imitation is the sincerest form of self-preservation, he joked one morning at their new office. Malcolm laughed softly. "If the air's cleaner, I don't care who gets the praise." That same afternoon, Naomi returned from a speaking tour. Her documentary had won the National Student Film Award and was now being distributed to schools across the country. She entered the office with her camera around her neck and a light in her eyes that only youth and purpose could carry. "Dad, they want to screen the film at the United Nations Youth Summit," she said, trying to sound calm but failing. He raised an eyebrow, smiling with pride. "The United Nations? Huh. Guess the sky's not the limit anymore." She rolled her eyes playfully. "You taught me that," Ellen called later that week. "We're expanding internationally," she said over the phone. "The European Union wants to implement the Equal Sky standards across member states." Malcolm chuckled. "Careful. Ellen, you're starting to sound like a revolutionary." She laughed. "You made me one. But not every call brought good news." That Friday evening, a journalist reached out asking for a new interview. "Mr. Hayes," the reporter said, "we're doing a feature on the long-term impact of the Equal Sky movement. Some are calling you a hero. Others still say you destabilized an industry. How would you like to be remembered?" Malcolm paused, his voice low but clear. "I don't need to be remembered. I just need what I did to outlast the argument." That night, he and Clara hosted a small gathering for the foundation staff. The house buzzed with laughter and warmth, the living room glowing under soft yellow light. Jordan shared stories from his travels, training international teams, while Naomi sat by the fireplace, listening to volunteers talk about their projects. It felt like family, one built not by blood, but by belief. As the evening quieted, Malcolm stepped outside with his cup of tea. Snowflakes had begun to fall, gentle and slow. Ellen called again, her voice lighter than he'd ever heard it. "I wanted to tell you first," she said. "SkyNova just signed on to fund a full scholarship program under the Equal Sky banner. 100 students a year." He smiled, shaking his head in disbelief. "That's beautiful." "Ellen, you started it," she said. "You should be proud." "I'm grateful," he replied. Pride fades, gratitude stays. A few days later, Naomi was invited to speak at a university event on legacy and leadership. She asked Malcolm to attend as her guest. On stage, under bright lights, she told their story not as a tragedy, but as a testimony. "My father taught me that silence is heavy," she said, "and that sometimes you have to stop everything just to remind the world how to breathe." The audience fell into quiet awe. At the end of her speech, she pointed to him in the crowd. "That's him, my dad. He didn't chase change. He became the calm that forced it to appear." When it was over, she joined him backstage, eyes shining. "Did I embarrass you?" she teased. He smiled, emotion softening his voice. "You made me see myself better than I ever could." Later that week, he received an unexpected package at his office. Inside was a small model airplane, hand-carved, polished smooth, with the words "Equal Sky" etched across the wings. There was no sender's name, only a note. You grounded flights. You lifted souls. He placed it on his desk, right beside Naomi's framed photo of that morning in the airport, the reflection of two twin girls looking out a glass window at a plane they never boarded. That image, once a symbol of pain, had become a reminder of transformation. A few nights later, Clara found him sitting alone in the living room, staring at the model plane. "You look far away," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Just thinking about how fast time moves, how a single moment can ripple forever." She sat beside him. "Maybe that's how you measure a life, not in years, but in the echoes it leaves." He reached over, took her hand, and whispered, "If that's true, then we've lived a full one." As winter deepened, Naomi prepared to leave for New York to begin her fellowship at a major media network. The night before her flight, she sat on the porch with her father. "You know, I used to think the story was about that day at the airport," she said, "but now I think it was about everything after." He nodded, eyes gentle. "That's how stories work. They start when you think they've ended." The next morning, he drove her to the airport, the same terminal, the same runway, but a different feeling entirely. When she checked in, the gate agent smiled warmly and said, "Miss Hayes, your seat's been upgraded compliments of the Equal Sky Partnership." Naomi turned to her father, laughing. "Looks like you're still grounding flights in your own way." He chuckled. "No, sweetheart. I just helped change the wind direction." As he watched her plane lift into the gray sky, a memory returned the first time he'd seen her denied boarding, the fury that rose in his chest, and the promise he made to himself that day. And now, watching her ascend freely, he realized that promise had come full circle. When the plane disappeared into the clouds, Malcolm whispered to himself, "Fly safe, my girl." He stood there for a long moment, the cold wind brushing against his coat. Then, quietly, he smiled, not the smile of a man who'd won, but of one who finally understood that victory was never the point. Change was. And as the wind shifted across the runway, carrying faint echoes of engines and possibility, Malcolm Hayes turned and walked away not from the past, but toward a horizon still wide and waiting. Spring returned quietly, softening the chill that had lingered for months. The air in Atlanta felt new again, filled with a lightness that hinted at renewal. Dogwood trees bloomed along Malcolm Hayes Street, white petals drifting across the porch where he sat with his morning coffee. The world had moved on in the way it always does, but somehow it still whispered his name. Naomi was in New York now, thriving in her fellowship. Her documentary had become a teaching tool, screened in universities and corporate training programs around the world. Every so often, she would call late at night from her apartment, her voice alive with stories, meetings with journalists, interviews with students who said her film changed the way they saw justice. Malcolm would listen quietly, smiling at the sound of her joy. One evening, she said, "Dad, a girl came up to me today after the screening. She said she wanted to be a pilot because of us." He chuckled softly. "Because of you? You mean—" "No," she said, "because of us. You gave her a sky she believed she belonged to." Those words stayed with him long after the call ended. He walked to his study and stood before the framed photograph that had started it all two little girls' reflections on the airport glass. It was still there, the image that had once been pain and now was peace. For the first time, he realized it wasn't just a memory. It was proof that silence could be broken and rebuilt into something beautiful. A few days later, Ellen Briggs called from Brussels. Her voice carried the hum of distant rain. "Malcolm," she said, "the European Aviation Council just ratified Equal Sky as part of their standard ethics code. It's official, you've gone global." He laughed, a quiet, genuine sound. "No, Ellen, we've gone global." She paused, emotion warming her tone. "You know, you were right all along. Fairness isn't policy, it's practice." He nodded to himself. "And practice only matters if it keeps flying." At the same time, Jordan Lee had taken over as executive director of the Equal Sky Foundation. He called Malcolm often for advice, but had begun leading with his own quiet strength. "We're partnering with NASA for an educational program," Jordan told him one afternoon. "They want to use your story as part of their diversity in aviation campaign." Malcolm grinned. "From grounding flights to reaching space, I'll take that trajectory." "You realize you've become a legend, right?" Jordan teased. Malcolm shook his head. "No legends, just lessons. Back home." Clara was planning their anniversary dinner. She had chosen a small restaurant overlooking the Chattahoochee River, a place they hadn't visited since their early years of marriage. When they arrived, the sunset poured gold across the water, turning everything warm and weightless. They talked about simple things: the garden, Naomi's new apartment, a stray cat that had started sleeping on their porch. And for a while, it felt like the world had come full circle. "Do you ever miss it?" Clara asked as they shared dessert. "Miss what?" "The power, the noise, the title." He smiled, eyes crinkling. "No, titles are loud. Peace is quiet." She nodded. "You always did love the quiet. It's the only place you can hear the truth." He replied. Later that night, as they drove home, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Naomi. She had just returned from a late-night shoot in Brooklyn. "You'd be proud of me. Dad, I used your line again. Justice doesn't need permission to board." People loved it. He smiled down at the screen, replying simply, "Always proud. Naomi, keep flying." Weeks passed, and life found a slower rhythm. Malcolm spent his mornings mentoring young professionals through the Equal Sky Leadership Program, teaching them that integrity wasn't an accessory, it was the foundation. One afternoon, after a long seminar, a young woman lingered behind. "Mr. Hayes," she said shyly, "I was one of those girls who used to work ground crew at Aerosky. The day you stopped the flights, I thought you were out of your mind. But now I understand. You didn't ground planes. You grounded fear." Malcolm looked at her, humbled. "You're the reason it was worth it." That night, as rain tapped softly against the window, he wrote another letter in his journal. "The world spins fast. People forget faster. But every now and then, a pause stays long enough to change the air. That's all I ever wanted, to make the air easier to breathe for the ones who come after." When he closed the book, Clara appeared at the door, smiling gently. "Writing again." "Always," he said, "just trying to catch the wind before it moves on." In early May, the Equal Sky Foundation hosted its first international summit in Washington, D.C. Leaders from across industries attended. Naomi flew in from New York to film the event. The ballroom buzzed with energy, faces from around the world united under a single banner. One sky, every soul. Ellen opened the ceremony with grace, introducing Malcolm as the man who stopped the skies long enough for us to find our conscience. The crowd erupted in applause. As he stepped onto the stage, the lights softened, and for a moment, he could see the entire journey laid out behind him: the airport, the protest, the boardroom, the porch. He spoke simply, without notes. "When I began this, I didn't want to lead a movement. I just wanted to keep a promise to my daughter and to myself, a promise that we wouldn't keep teaching silence to the next generation. The world doesn't need perfect people. It needs present ones. People who stay, who see, who act. The sky is wide enough for all of us. But fairness, like flight, must be practiced every single day. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: equality doesn't arrive. It ascends. The room stood still, then rose in a standing ovation. Naomi's camera trembled slightly in her hands as tears blurred her viewfinder. That evening, after the event, father and daughter walked together by the reflecting pool outside the Lincoln Memorial. The city lights shimmered across the water, and the air felt impossibly still. Naomi slipped her hand into his. "Dad," she said quietly, "when I was little, I used to think you were a giant. Now I realize you just stood tall when the world bent." He looked at her, eyes soft. Maybe that's all being a giant ever means. They walked in silence for a while, the gentle sound of distant traffic blending with the night. Then Naomi asked, "Do you think people will remember what you did 50 years from now?" He smiled faintly. "They don't need to remember me, Naomi. As long as they remember the lesson that no one's sky should ever be smaller because of who they are." The next morning, before heading home, Malcolm stopped by the airport once more. The same terminal, the same gate, gate B19. The memories returned like quiet echoes. But there was no anger, now only gratitude. He stood by the window, watching as a group of young girls, black, Asian, white, Latina, boarded a plane together, laughing and carefree. A gate attendant noticed him standing there and smiled. Beautiful sight. "Isn't it?" Malcolm nodded. It always was. When the plane lifted into the sky, the sunlight caught its wings, turning them gold for a moment before it disappeared into the clouds. And standing there, alone but at peace, Malcolm Hayes whispered under his breath, "That's how it should be." The world had turned. The skies had changed, and though time would carry everything forward, the air itself somewhere, somehow, would still remember the man who once grounded it, only so it could rise again, fairer and freer than before. The story of Malcolm Hayes reminds us that integrity often demands a price, and true change rarely arrives wrapped in comfort. It asks us to pause and choose: will we accept the quiet wrongs that unfold before us, or will we stand still long enough to confront them in life? We all face moments when fairness feels distant and doing the right thing seems costly. Yet, as Malcolm showed, dignity isn't about winning, it's about refusing to look away. The world may measure success in profits and titles, but real legacy is built in the spaces where compassion outweighs convenience. For older generations especially, this story is a quiet echo of timeless wisdom that strength isn't always loud, and leadership doesn't always come from the front. Sometimes, it begins in the silence of moral conviction. When one person says this ends here, justice, like flight, depends on balance, and when one of us rises, we all rise a little higher. Thank you for watching and sharing this journey with us. Stories like this remind us that compassion, courage, and kindness can still change the world, one choice at a time. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter, stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of the best in humanity. Stay kind, stay hopeful, and we'll see you in the next story.